What's up guys, PJ here from 3D Printing Canada. Today in front of me I have the Ender 3 V2. It's been a little while since we've done a quick start video, so today we're going to unbox and build as well as do some slicing for you guys. So let's get to that unboxing and show you what's inside. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to point out to you guys is the main base plate. Everything now in the Ender V2 is neatly packed aside. So you have your power supply, everything is all kept nice and neat in this one. You get a drawer, you get a belt tensioner for the Y. Here's your hot end assembly and your X carriage. Next we have two pieces of 20 by 40 extrusion. These will be for your Z uprights. We have the X gantry bar, which is a 2020, as well as a 2020 for the top of your printer. Pre-greased Z rod. They keep it in a heat shrink tubing for you to stop metal and parts from getting in it and shipping. Next we have one of our X gantry brackets with the extruder motor, extruder, and your X motor as well as end stop. The right side X mount bracket with all three wheels. Got your eccentric nut on there. Then we have our Z end stop switch, our Z motor, spool holder, and we're gonna have our belt tensioner and one screw that comes with the belt tensioner for your X gantry. We have our screen. Next we have one spare nozzle and one spare pneumatic push fitting for your extruder. We have our X gantry belt, the plastic end pieces for the upright on the 2020 bar at the top of your printer. All the hardware to assemble your printer. It's really not too many pieces, guys. And we have our power cable. The extruder, this is like a wheel to help you turn the filament in. Goes on top of the extruder. So to help turn in the filament. They give you maybe a couple hundred grams, maybe 100 grams of PLA in the kit to get started. A user manual, as well as your basic tool kit. All right, so now that we have all our parts and hardware laid out neatly on the table, we can go ahead and start assembling this printer. First thing I like to do is both Z uprights. Now, this one, I'm going to place it. Now, what I like to do is to make sure your frame is square. As you can take a carpenter's square, in my case, I've printed one. And what I like to do, we go ahead and we take these two bolts. I'm gonna slide one through. Now this is a 4mm Allen key they give you in the kit. Now this really doesn't matter. On the old Ender it would matter which way you put this upright in. But for this case, it doesn't matter. So I just thread these in and I only snug them up, and I'm gonna show you guys why in 1 second. And then I'll go ahead and I'll take the second one and install it. Now the reason I leave the printer slightly off the bed, or excuse me, off the table, is so that now I can go ahead and take my carpenter's framing square here, or carpenter square, excuse me, after I've got this all, and now I just snug it. Now, the reason being is I want to take that square and I want to make sure there is no gap here. So I'm gonna, so you guys can see this, I'm gonna make a big gap and make it so it's not square by tightening one down more than the other. And you can see the gap, it's not flush. So now I'll take the other screw and tighten down until it walks right in, till there's no light showing through anymore. There we go. Now I know that my upright is in the right position. You also want to make sure they're not crooked here. So if they are, you're going to have to go back and loosen and do it again. You want to make sure you're not twisted here. So now I'll take the second one and follow the same procedure. Now, if you were to build this printer and not have the square and end up with that gap, you're gonna end up with some major problems. So now, I'll take this to the side and I will tighten up one side that needs to come in. So now that we have both uprights level to the bed, we know we're gonna have a smooth path running up and down here with no play on our X gantry. Okay, so the next step I like to do is I like to assemble the complete X gantry, including the belt and everything, before I actually install it onto the printer. It makes life a lot easier in my opinion. So the first thing I'd like to do is grab my 2.5mm wrench. I like to use Allen wrenches personally, or sorry, hex keys as opposed to Allen wrenches if possible. And a good set always helps, guys, so keep that in mind. Now, the first thing you want to do is, this has a little bit of a drilled out beveled section, okay? That's actually going to fit this nut right here so it sits in the recess. Now this part is extremely important. If you don't tighten these correctly and in the right position, what happens is a lot of people will not tighten them enough, or they'll over tighten them and they'll strip the aluminum extrusion. So keep that in mind. Tight, but not too tight where you're gonna strip it. But what happens is if you don't have this situated properly and that's not tight, this can move freely while you're printing, so it will make for very inconsistent prints. So we wanna make sure that we tighten those correctly. So what I like to do is I like to take the two screws right away, and they've got locking nuts on them, okay? So I go ahead and I drop those in place. Oh. And sometimes I like to drop them too, but I like to get them in place and ready. So now that they're inside there, I'll go ahead and I'll pre-take one driver here, set it in place so I'm ready to thread these. And go ahead and make sure you get the right side. Rest it into place. Now I'm just gonna snug these at first. Now, this is the really important part. If these were too loose, this bar can move, as you can see. What you want is you want the bar completely flush and level along this plate. So I'm gonna go ahead, now that it's level, give an extra little tighten out. Once it's tight and it can't move, that's good. Just remember, if you over tighten, you could potentially strip it. So we're gonna tighten, and now you can see this side can't move anymore. There's no play in there, it can't move. The next step I like to do is I like to actually get the belt in place. So you go ahead and you take your belt, and I like to run it through here. So I'll run it through both sides, and sometimes you gotta take your driver to get the one side through. So I'll get the top side through, like so, as you can see here. So I'll get that through, but then I like to take the second side and slide it through the bottom as well. Now, a lot of the time I take my driver here and just carefully pop that through and make sure it goes onto the pulley. So now I have my belt on. Next thing I like to do is go ahead and slide that X gantry on. Now leave the belt sitting inside here like this. Go ahead and slide that on, like so, nice and easy. And you can go ahead and pull this through. Now, I will hook up the one side here into the groove that it's supposed to go into. So right under here like so, you're gonna go ahead and place that belt in that groove. Run to the next step, which is we're going to install our belt tensioner. Now to start, we've got to unscrew this little piece here, okay? And we take this piece off, and I'm gonna set that down like so. It actually goes this way. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this belt, head in, run your belt through. You have to turn it sideways because of the brass fitting. You have to turn it sideways, get it through, and then flip it back again. So once I've got that through, I go ahead and take the bracket, slide it back in, and then just get the belt tensioner on temporarily. We're not going to thread this on all the way. So once we have that in place, so now I'll go ahead and I'm going to, before I attach any of this with the other piece, leave it a little loose and free like so. Now we've got 3 screws here. We're only going to use 2 of them. They give you 1 spare. So we're going to use the locking nut on the back side and the countersunk nut that comes in the bag with your belt tensioner. We're going to go ahead and use that on the front facing side. So you want to go ahead and I'm going to flip this like so. We're going to install our first screw. Now this, get it started here. Again, I'm just going to snug this screw up. And I'll take our 3rd screw. And we'll go ahead and, now I'm going to install the belt tensioner. Like so. 1 screw in the back. Now I'm only going to snug everything down, guys. We're not going to go ahead and crank any of this down yet. So once you've got it in, again, with this process, if you don't have this bar nice and flat along here, you're going to have a problem. So we want to keep that nice and flat and true. Once you've got it lined up, go ahead and tighten these down. Extra little tight in there. And again on this one, because it's running into plastic, I don't over tighten it. And then we go ahead and we take our last screw here on the front side of our belt tensioner. Let's put it in, thread it in. Now the reason we leave the belt tensioner loose is because now for this part, we've got to hook our belt onto here. So if you don't leave that loose enough, you won't be able to install it. So back it off until you have enough room where you can comfortably just put that in there. Now, take your belt tensioner, we're going to tighten it up. Now you want to make sure on the underside, when you get these in place, you want to make sure that they're in the right spot so they're actually riding in the track correctly. All right, we don't want any rubbing, so we want to make sure those are lined up in the slots correctly. And just go ahead and start tensioning your belt. It's as easy as turning that screw. We're going to go ahead and tension that up. Now I like to get, I'm sure you won't hear this on camera, but you want to get that nice happy medium, a bass tone when you strike the belt. I'll try and put that up to my mic so you guys can hear it. You're going to get that nice bass tone. And then you know you've got that happy medium between tight and loose. You don't want to have it too tight, you don't want to have it too loose. Next step, I just take our pneumatic push fitting, so it's already installed. I go ahead and I just hand tighten this one. There's no need to take a wrench and crank that down. Because if you ever had to take your tube out again and it was stuck in your push fitting, giving you a hard time, now you can just loosen it by hand. And I do give a little crank. It's got a lock nut on it, a little washer there. You'll be fine. And then you just go ahead, take your Bowden tube here that's already been heat seated from the factory, push it all the way in and make sure it's made it and sat all the way down. And we take this little blue C-clip and we go ahead and we place it in. Now you have your X gantry completely assembled on the table, ready to go. So the next step we're gonna take here is we're gonna install our Z motor into our Z extrusion. Very simple, 2 screws. While you're at it, take your Z motor, plug, if you'd like, plug it in. Now we'll go ahead, get our first screw started. Really simple. Now with these, again, I want them to be tight, but I don't want them to be overly tight. So you don't want that motor to be able to shift around at all, but you also want it to be snug down, tight enough that it won't shift around. Now guys, something really important, because it's not always guaranteed from the factory that these things are gonna be tightened down properly. So I'm gonna show you guys here. What I like to do is just double check my Z motor, give that an extra little, yep, see, and I was able to tighten that Z motor bolt for the coupler down a little bit tighter. So just double check that. Okay, so the next step we're gonna take is installing the Z end stop. It's very simple. There's 2 T-nuts here, and I like to plug it in ahead of time, and then take your 3mm driver or provided tool. Now there's a little plastic piece here that is actually gonna rest against the 40/40 extrusion, guys, okay? So when you slide these in, you wanna make sure they're loose enough, almost to the point where they're gonna fall off. That way they actually catch and spin inside your 20/40 extrusion. So you're gonna go ahead and give that a little wiggle and get them in there. And then you wanna make sure that these are actually turning inside. So I like to start with the bottom one. See, it didn't grab. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that spins inside. So always do the bottom one first. So it didn't spin inside for me, so I'll go ahead and try again. So now it's actually spun inside and it's on there. Now you can actually look down and see if the T-nut spun from the top one. And there it goes, and it makes its little turn over. So now we have our Z end stop installed. All right, so the next step, guys, now that we've assembled our X gantry all the way, we're just gonna simply place it over top here, line up our wheels. Now it might give a little bit of resistance on this top wheel here. It's okay, just give it a little push. Uh-oh. Give it a little push on there. And now you wanna make sure that this moves up. See how it's nice and smooth and it's not just dropping under its own weight? That's what you want. Now we don't have any play on the side, and we don't even have a Z-rod in yet. So if you've built this and you've got play here, you might have not have tightened down these 2 screws here tight enough. Next step I like to do is take that Z-rod, and we'll take it out of the heat shrink tubing. Now there is grease on there, so it's gonna get your fingers a little oily. Now this part is extremely important that you do this correctly. This is a 2.5 driver. Now you want to go ahead and push the Z coupler down. You're going to feel it. It's actually going to bottom out. We don't want that. If it bottoms out, it's going to create problems in your print. So I'm going to go ahead and lift that up just a little bit so it's not all the way out, but we'll loosen this off a little at first. There, it's hit the bottom. And I'll lift it up just a little bit, that way it's not bottomed out in the Z coupler. Go ahead and make sure you crank this one down extra tight, because otherwise it's gonna slip right out. So one part I do find extremely important, we don't want any binding in this Z-rod. So what I like to do is I like to loosen these, not all the way. I'll just loosen them a bit. So we don't have any binding in there, and it gives it a little play, and then I'll just kind of snug them tight. You don't have to over tighten these. You want that little bit of backlash. So there we go. Now, next step we're gonna take here. So we're gonna install the top. You're gonna need your 4mm wrench, your top piece. Now this is important. I see a lot of people make this mistake. There's some countersunk screws here. Some people will actually mistakenly put it on this way. But if you do it this way, your screws end up hitting the top. We don't want that. We want the screws in this way so they fall into the extrusion into the countersunk holes. So I'll just put one in each side to start. I'll take my driver, and these should just thread right in nice and easy. Now at this point, I'll actually take my square. Perfect. No light coming through anywhere on either side. And then I just snug these up. They don't need to be over cranked. Just enough, because they have lock washers, so just enough that they're holding everything together and you're not over cranking them and potentially maybe pulling these in a little bit, your Z uprights. So just as long as I take a double check there, everything's nice and everything's nice. So now we have a totally true gantry, which leaves no play. I haven't even touched the eccentric nuts. Now, if you've built everything according to plan, you should be able to not have any play right from the factory. So there's no play on this side. There's a wobble in my X gantry here, as you can see. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have Jaron zoom in on this shot so you guys can actually see what's going on here. If you're new to 3D printing, this is something that's really easy to overlook. Now, the eccentric nut, okay, so we're gonna take our 10mm wrench. Now they do provide you with one. I prefer to use my own tools. The ones that come in the kit will work just fine. You wanna take that nut and turn it. Now, look, oh, I've just made it looser. So now that we've got it this way, you can just get your wrench underneath here, your 10mm, get it on that eccentric nut, and as you turn it, it'll eventually get tight. Now, if you've got it, see, I've got it where it's not wiggling, but it's not too tight along here either, right? And that's what you want. You don't want this loose. If this rattles loose, just keep in mind, anything on your printer, if this is loose, so if your X isn't snug against the rail here, you're gonna end up with problems. You're gonna end up with sag, squish prints, etc. It's not fun. So if we just go through these steps correctly and build the printer properly, you'll have a lot of success. This is a really good printer out of the box. Now, once we've realized, okay, everything's good. Now, if it is a little loose, maybe from the factory, the same nut that's under your hot end on the wheel here at the bottom is the same nut that is on left and right side here. So there's one here and one here. You wanna have a little bit of play in the wheels on the side where they spin freely like so, but you don't want them easily spinning freely. Then it's too loose. You wanna go ahead and snug those up a little bit. So now that we've got pretty much everything assembled, we're just gonna go ahead and pop these two things on the side and we're gonna attach our screen, which again, really simple. It's got some T-nuts and it attaches to the side. So we'll pop in those two end pieces so you're not cutting yourself on the top of your extrusion at all. We'll go ahead and we'll take this screen. Again, the same thing. Make sure they're loose enough that these are gonna turn inside your 40/40 extrusion. So, no, look, I have mine so loose, they're falling out. It wouldn't be a video without PJ dropping tools and parts. All right, guys, so we'll go ahead and we'll take that screen plug. We'll go ahead and we'll plug it in. I prefer to have it plugged in already. And then you just kind of give these, I find you give them a wiggle and it'll get in place. Now, to show you guys a little better what we're doing, we'll tip the printer on the side. So right in here, we are going to take our 2.5 driver. You can put the screen where you want it. I mean, I prefer to have it right up at the front. I've seen people put it at the back. You could print something and have it completely off the printer. We'll leave that entirely up to you. But I like to bring it right to the front edge here. And go ahead, same thing. These two I can look in and see that they're turning. The back one I can't, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that one first. If that's not connected and turned inside, the screen will just fall right off. So we know we did it right. But now with these ones, you can go ahead and you can take a little peek inside there. And there, the first one made its turn. And the second one made its turn. The nice thing is you can look in and see that. Now that we have our screen on, I'm gonna turn the printer around. I'm gonna go ahead. We're going to take our X plug. We're gonna plug it into our X motor. That easy. Just make sure you got it in there properly. We'll take our E motor. We'll go ahead and plug it in. Again, make sure you have them seated in correctly. Okay? And then the X end stop. It's right inside here. This is probably the trickiest one to plug in, but at the same time, it's really not that bad. So you just go ahead. It's gonna be tough for you guys to see it. We'll just have to, once you got it lined up like so in there, go ahead and just push it in. Now we have our X end stop installed. Literally the last thing to install on this printer now is our spool holder. So now we're gonna install the spool holder with the last two nuts and your T-nuts. Go ahead and again, the same thing. Just give it a small thread on there. Another small thread on there. Now these are gonna be, I believe these are 3 mil if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they're 3 mil. So you're gonna go ahead. A lot of people like to mount it right close. Now again, now that I've got the one screwed in, we'll turn the printer around so you guys can see it's not coming out. You can take that other one in again. You can look. And the T-nut made its turn, so now we know we have it installed correctly. Final thing, it's just a twist on end, through, and then just tighten her down. And that's the Ender 3 V2 assembly. Leave this part optional for you guys if you want to use it. I find I can't see when I'm putting the filament in, so I'll actually not use this piece, but some people like to use it to get the filament in. That's entirely up to you. You can use it or not use it. Next step we're gonna take now that we've got our Ender V2 completely assembled, we're gonna double check that bed Y-axis tension. Looks good to me. But we're also gonna go ahead and fire it up, go through our manual bed leveling procedure, as well as our first test print. Now before we start this printer up, it is a must, and I mean a must, guys, that we go ahead and check our voltage selector. We don't wanna be on 220, okay? We wanna be on 115. So you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna see that's at 230 right now. So Jaron, go ahead and zoom in and show them how they come set for European and China standards, which is 240 or 230, excuse me. So we're gonna go ahead and switch over because we're here in Canada. So if you're in Canada, you're gonna wanna put that selector over, okay? Avoid any problems. Next thing you do, before bed leveling, we just take our plug our printer in, turn it on for the first time. All right, so now we'll go through some of the screen functionality here. So we have your basic print where once you're ready to print, you have our print logo. Then we have our prepare. Some people like to preheat through here. You have the option of preheat PLA, okay? It's set to 60 and 200. I'm fine with that. You can also go into control and preheat ahead of time and maybe do a little purging or whatever you'd like to do. You can preheat for ABS. You can cool it down there. You don't need to set your home offset, so don't worry about that. You can go ahead and first thing you're gonna do is auto home. Make sure everything's working correctly. So once we get that auto home done, we can go ahead and heat, the bed should be heated up. We'll be able to, from there, do our manual bed leveling procedure and then start our print. Now we know all of our axes move in the proper direction. We're gonna go ahead, because we're already preheating, disable the steppers. Okay, that gives you the ability to move around on your build surface. Now, you're probably not quite ready to do that off the hop. So you'll probably need to tighten the springs down a little bit more and then we'll bring them back, the bed back up into place. So at first I'm gonna tighten these down a bit. Now don't over tighten them because you really don't want to bend the corners of your build surface. By doing that, you can actually create a bow in the middle and have it too tight out here. Now we do recommend installing, if you do buy this printer, go ahead and upgrade to the yellow springs right away. So if you did want to go ahead and upgrade to the yellow bed springs, you can do so. I highly recommend it. If you want to just keep the machine stock, I still recommend that you upgrade to the yellow bed springs. It definitely holds your bed level a lot longer. The ones that come with it are just a little more flimsy. Not to say they don't work, just to say the yellow ones are definitely an upgrade. If you're going to keep your machine stock, I say that's a must. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these up so I don't scratch my build surface. My bed is at temperature now. Go ahead and get yourself a piece of binder paper. I'm just going to use some note paper here. And what you want to do is, I like to do it manually this way. Home it, disable the steppers, like so, after you've homed it. And I'll go ahead and I'll put that nozzle right over top of the first spring. And then now you're going to turn clockwise to bring the bed back up till you get that paper dragging. See, now I got it too tight, the paper won't even move. So I always like to tighten back in too. There we go. You really want to feel, it needs to move freely, but you want to feel that little bit of drag there. See, that's a little too much. Not enough. There's like it's a happy medium. You don't want to go around and do this a few times. Now what I'll do is I'll move over to the next position. Now you can see the paper just moves. So I'll go ahead and release that by turning clockwise until I feel that paper catch. So I'll just keep doing this until the paper, oh, there we go. Now it's too tight. I can barely move it. I'll go ahead counterclockwise until I get that perfect little bit of drag where it's dragging on the paper and the paper can move freely. So I'll go ahead and I'll move back. It actually seems a little tight, and the reason I keep the paper under it is so I don't scratch the build surface. You can actually push down on it as well as if you'd like. Okay, lots of room there. And again, the same thing. I'll just start turning this clockwise until I feel that, oh, there we go, the paper's grabbed. And go ahead and tighten her up a little until it's still a little tight. You just want to feel that drag. And I'll go ahead and move along. Tighten that down. So now this one's loose as well. And I'll go ahead and clockwise. Oh, it just grabbed there, and that's a little too tight, and just very lightly I'll tighten that up counterclockwise. Now you want to go ahead and slide back to the first spot, because there's a good chance that it's not leveled properly. So that's why I like to keep going around. And double checking. See, now this one isn't grabbing anymore, so I'll have to loosen it. So clockwise until it grabs again. And then again to the back one. Slide that paper under. And see, now this one isn't grabbing anymore. So you want to kind of refine your bed level. And you're going to keep going around. I'll even go into the center here and just give a little bit more fine tuning, show you guys that little trick in a second. So again, now I've got, it's free. I need to loosen it a bit. So now what I like to do is, after I've done all four corners, let's see if this one's ready. And I put the paper under. Does it have, see, it's a little too tight, so we'll tighten it back down by going counterclockwise. And you can see how you can't just go to each four corner once. You have to do it multiple times. And I'll check this one again. It's a little tight, so we'll counterclockwise on the till I can, there we go. Now what I like to do is bring it into the center of the bed. So I'll go inwards here. Now, another little trick you can do too is I'll look underneath the nozzle, and you can see just a little bit of light underneath that nozzle. So you don't necessarily need the paper here, but you can still use it. So what I'd like to do is show you guys. Now this is tough. I can't really show you this on camera. You really have to just look underneath and you'll see that little bit of light. Now take your finger, push that X. Now if you notice that that little bit of light under there, that gap is just a little much, which I've actually noticed on this side. Now I bet you I can't get that paper under there now. Yeah, see, I can't. So I'll go ahead and I'll tighten this again. Just a little bit at a time until I can get that paper under there. So it was okay on the one side, but now look, I still can't get my paper under. Now I can, nice and perfect, like so. So now I'll move the bed forward. Let's see if I can get the paper under here. Oh, look, as you can see, it's too tight. So you're gonna have too squished of a first layer here. So this is why I like to not only go to all four corners, but move in on the bed a little to really get that fine tuning. This is extremely important if you want a level bed. Or you could just be like me, you get a BL touch, you get it close and let that do the math. So counterclockwise again until I can get the paper under. Okay, now I'll check the other side. I still have that nice little bit of light. I should almost be able to fit it underneath. Just a little bit too tight. And that's it. Now I'll just look again. I'll move my X along and I can see that little bit of light. This very tiny bit of light underneath there, guys. And it's staying even all the way along. So this is just another way to take a little look. That's perfect. Perfect. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grab a roll of filament, the SD card, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to test print one of the Creality pre-sliced prints for you guys. So let's go through some of the basic screen functions. Now that we've leveled our bed, guys, we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to show you some of the basic screen control functions. So you've got your basic print section. There's no card in there right now, so it's not going to show you a file. All right, we'll go to prepare, where you have move, where you can move and access, disable stepper motors, like I showed you, and bed leveling, auto home. You're never really going to need to set your home offsets, so we won't worry about that. And you've got preheat PLA, preheat ABS, and cool down. Language selection, this is if you speak a different language, you can go ahead and switch it to Chinese, etc. So then we'll go back out of the prepare, we'll go to control. This is where all the cool stuff happens. You've got your temperature, where you can manually set your temperature, nozzle, bed. You can also do your fan speed. And again, you can adjust what you want your preheat for your PLA as well as your ABS. So whatever material you were printing, you could change your ABS to whatever you'd like. That way you have that preheat feature. So this is the actual settings. We'll go ahead and show you. You can change all your settings here and then save the parameter. And then when you go into your preheat menu, it'll be saved to what you guys set it to. All right, so that's all the features inside of the control, or inside of the preheat section there under temperature. And you've got your motion right here. None of this stuff for anybody who's new or a beginner is really going to come into play. You know, these are the stock settings. I recommend that you leave these alone. The only thing you might ever adjust is in the transmission ratio. If you go ahead and put on a direct drive or upgrade your kit, this right here is what's normally steps per millimeter for your actual so the transmission ratio or the gear ratio of your extruder. Now whether you have a Bondtech, a Micro Swiss, like the Micro Swiss from 93 would go to about 140. That's the sweet spot I found that works good for me. You can go ahead and calibrate your E-steps by doing the 100 millimeter extrusion test. But again, if you're leaving it stock, you will never need to play with any of these features. All right, guys? So next, anything you do, say you had a BL Touch and you just change your Z offset. You go ahead and hit store configuration, or if you put a micro Swiss direct drive on or a Bondtech extruder on and you were in motion here under transmission ratio, when you were done, if you didn't actually go down and hit store the configuration, it won't remember any of that. Okay, so that's basically all the features you can do inside this printer. Now the info screen just basically tells you, you know, it's 220, 220, 250, what firmware version. Now, this isn't the latest version. Now, when you first buy a printer, I highly do not recommend upgrading your firmware. Reason being is you haven't even put it through any hours yet. I highly recommend you run your printer for about 100 hours before updating firmware. Unless you're an experienced user, by all means go ahead. You've done this before. We don't have to tell you about that. All right, so that's all the basic setup. So now that I've actually got it preheated to 260, I'll go ahead and I'm gonna show you guys. I'm gonna turn the printer sideways here. We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna install some of this Creality filament here. So with this little knob on the top, now this is where it can come convenient, where you just kind of insert it into the hole there, and then you can start threading it in. But if you don't have it right, this is why I prefer not to use this, so I'll pop that off. Push the lever here, kind of bend where you've cut. Now you want to always cut. I'm actually going to grab my cutters here and show you guys. So if you're new to 3D printing, you might not know this, but you want to cut this on a 45-degree angle. So we'll go ahead and cut that on a 45-degree angle. And then it might not be straight enough, so I'll tend to just give it a little bend. So when I actually do take and install it into the extruder here, and press the lever, and I can guide it into the hole. That's why I'm not the biggest fan of these wheels. Some people like them. When it's on there and it's in there, now I can actually take that extruder and I can do it like that, or you can just push and manually push through like this. Be careful you don't bend or snap your filament. If you do snap your filament, it's probably wet. So once it's reached the nozzle, if you ever manually lift your printer up with the motors disabled, do it slowly. Now what I like to see is a little bit of filament. So this is where this can come in handy, where you can go ahead and turn that filament through. Now as you can see here, we've got filament coming out. That's great. This stuff actually does look a little bit wet, but we're gonna print with it anyways. Next, we're going to take that SD card you got with the printer. All right, we're gonna take that SD card that came with the printer, and this is so you can put it on the computer. We're also gonna take you guys through slicing and setting up Cura, Simplify 3D, and Prusa Slicer, guys. So we're gonna cover all three of them. Go ahead and take that SD card out, put it into the machine, it clicks in. One thing to note, now this is an easy mistake to make. One thing to note is that right here, you do want to make sure you actually get it into the SD card slot, because if you mistakenly push it underneath, this one doesn't seem like it can happen, but if you mistakenly get it underneath, you're gonna end up with your SD card inside your board. If that happens, shut the machine off right away. Don't try and pry it out. It's a few screws on the bottom to get inside. So go ahead and install that SD card. We're preheated. I'm gonna scroll over to print, and we've got no cards. Let's see. There we go. Sometimes if it glitches like that, you just push the card in and out till it gets a chance to read it. Now we're gonna go ahead and we'll start the cap print. So I'll hit start. So as you can see now, guys, the print has started. Sometimes it takes a few seconds, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't start right away. So the first thing it's gonna do is go down home the Z. It's gonna home all axes actually. And then it's gonna do a purge line. And here we go. We'll start that print. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set this up on a time lapse for you guys. right, guys, and we're back. So now that we've completely built the printer, went through some slicing steps, and printed the test print that came on the file, we really hope everything I showed you guys here today was helpful and that it helps you build your Ender with success. Hope you guys liked this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you like this content, leave us some comments down below of other things you'd like to see in the future. We'll see you in the next video.